The desert stretched like an endless canvas of gold and orange, each grain of sand shimmering under the unforgiving Afghan sun. Forward Operating Base Phoenix squatted in the middle of nothingness, a cluster of metal buildings, tents, and sandbags that smelled faintly of diesel, sweat, and dust. The heat pressed down like a living thing, curling into every crease of uniform, every piece of exposed skin, every nerve. Commander Jason Steele, Navy SEAL, career soldier, war veteran, and a man who had seen more bodies than he could count, drove slowly through the base in a military jeep. His boots rested on the pedals like anchors, but his mind was afloat in a storm of anticipation. The intelligence had been clear. The high-value target, an elusive insurgent leader known for orchestrating cross-border attacks, was somewhere in the surrounding valleys. Steele had been tracking him for months, and tonight they were expected to strike. Yet as the hum of the jeep's engine echoed across the compound, something unusual caught his eye. On the far side of the firing range, away from the chatter of soldiers preparing weapons, away from the smell of gunpowder, someone worked alone. At first, Steele thought it was a new recruit, green and inexperienced, fumbling with the heavy weapons. But then he noticed the way the figure moved, smooth, confident, precise. Every motion had a rhythm, a deliberate choreography. She knelt by a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle, dismantling it with methodical patience. Steele slowed the jeep to a crawl. Dust swirled around her boots, catching the light like tiny golden sparks. The rifle was massive, a beast that required strength and skill to operate. Most men struggled just to carry it over rocky terrain. Yet here she was, a woman, small-framed, hands delicate but steady, coaxing the weapon apart as though it were a violin. He stepped out of the jeep, boots crunching against the gravel, and walked toward her. Every instinct in his body, trained, honed, battle-ready, warned him not to interrupt, to observe first. But curiosity gnawed at him like a persistent desert rat. "Lieutenant Reyes," he said, testing the waters. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of steel and ice, calculating and unblinking. For a moment there was silence, heavy and tangible, broken only by the faint wind scratching the sand. Steele noticed the insignia on her uniform. It wasn't a standard deployment patch or a generic rank, it was specific, elite, highly classified, and most importantly, it was a sign that she wasn't just any soldier. "Commander Steele," she replied, her voice calm, unshaken, carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being observed yet never fazed. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't ask questions. She simply continued her work, twisting a delicate screw, inspecting the barrel, checking alignment as if performing surgery on the gun. Steele's eyes narrowed. He had seen sharpshooters, elite marksmen, but something about her aura was different. It wasn't just skill, it was instinct. A predator's instinct honed to perfection. He crouched beside her, careful not to disturb her rhythm. "You work alone?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "I always have," she said simply. Her eyes flicked to the horizon, scanning, measuring, calculating distances he couldn't even begin to guess. For a moment, Steele considered that maybe she was just another soldier trying to impress him. But then a subtle motion, the tilt of her head, the twitch of her finger along the trigger mechanism, stopped him. She was aware of everything around her, every shadow, every shift in wind, every imperfection in the sand. She wasn't training, she was alive, in a way most soldiers only pretended to be. Steele had never been the type to be impressed easily. He had seen heroes and villains, legends and failures, and had spent most of his life in between. Yet this woman handling the .50 caliber rifle with surgical precision, demanded recognition. He tried to hide his curiosity, but it was useless. "That's a Barrett .50, he said, as much to himself as to her. "Not many can operate that efficiently, not under pressure." She shrugged lightly. "It's heavy, yes, but that's what makes it effective. Distance doesn't scare me." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Distance. It was an odd thing to say, almost casual, but Steele knew exactly what she meant. The Barrett was famous not just for power but for reach, over 1,800 meters on a standard setup, stretching to extraordinary distances only in the hands of a sniper who could predict the physics of a bullet's arc better than the enemy could predict their own movements. He watched as she reassembled the rifle with an almost invisible elegance, as if the weapon was an extension of her body rather than a tool. Every part clicked, aligned, and tightened into place. She wiped her hands, looked through the scope, adjusted the bipod, and then, without a word, fired a test round into the distant valley. The sound echoed, muted yet commanding, and the impact kicked up dust miles away. Steele's breath caught. Most people could not see a shot land that far, let alone control it. He stepped closer, ignoring the heat, the dust, the rules of protocol that screamed he shouldn't be interrupting. "Lieutenant Reyes," he said again, this time with a sharper edge, "what target are you training on?" Her eyes met his briefly, calculating, cold. Then she smiled, or rather, a slight twitch of her lips that could almost be a smile. "Targets aren't always where you expect them." The statement wasn't arrogant. It was a warning. Steele felt a shiver. She was capable of things that defied logic, and if the intelligence he'd been following for months was correct, she had already done what no one thought possible. A sudden gust of wind kicked up, scattering sand in a swirling cloud. Steele shielded his eyes, squinting. The desert was merciless, and yet, even in its chaos, she remained steady. Her hands moved like clockwork, her body a study in controlled patience. Steele realized then what he hadn't allowed himself to admit. He was watching a legend in motion. Not someone who had stories told about them in hushed tones, but someone who was actively rewriting the definition of precision, control, and lethal skill in real time. He cleared his throat. "You're working alone because you choose to, or because no one can keep up with you." Her eyes flickered brief, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for Steele to notice the ghost of a burden behind the professional mask. "Both," she said softly. "Some responsibilities are easier carried alone." The weight of her words settled on Steele's shoulders. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a weapon, trained to perfection, carrying invisible scars and untold victories. And yet, there was a quiet humanity in her, just barely visible behind her icy focus, a trace that suggested she had chosen this path with a purpose no one could understand. For Steele, the question now wasn't about the mission, the target, or the valley outside the base. It was about the woman before him. How had someone so young, so precise, come to hold so much power in a world that didn't forgive mistakes? He took a step back, his mind racing. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the sand. Steele knew the day ahead would be long, dangerous, and unforgiving. But watching Reyes at the firing range, he realized something chilling. This mission had just changed. And not just because of the target they were tracking. Because somewhere in the desert, behind a rifle that could stretch a bullet farther than most men could dream, was a soldier whose skill and silence could alter the course of history. Steele exhaled slowly, trying to steady the adrenaline prickling his veins. And then, just as he thought he understood the gravity of the situation, Reyes picked up a notebook from the sand, scribbled a calculation, and muttered under her breath, "Distance, 3,247 meters." Steele froze. His eyes widened. The numbers didn't lie, and neither did the quiet, dangerous smile she gave him as she loaded the rifle again. The night fell over forward operating base Phoenix like a velvet shroud, heavy and suffocating. The desert air cooled slightly, but the tension remained thick, pressing against Steele's chest like a physical weight. The stars above were distant and cold, distant witnesses to the silent war waging below. He sat alone on the edge of the command tent, maps and digital displays glowing faintly in the dim light. His mind refused rest. Hannah Reyes had disappeared after her brief demonstration with the Barrett .50. Steele didn't know if she had gone to prepare for an upcoming mission, or if she simply vanished into the labyrinth of tents and sandbags to avoid unnecessary questions. That didn't matter. He couldn't shake the image of her calm, methodical movements, the almost supernatural way she handled the rifle, disassembling it like a child assembling a puzzle, her eyes scanning the horizon with an almost imperceptible calculation of wind, distance, and trajectory. Steele's gut tightened as he reviewed her file on the secure tablet in front of him. Lieutenant Hannah Reyes, 24 years old, combat deployed twice, classified as a sniper prodigy, but far more than that. There were whispers in the intelligence community, hints at something extraordinary. She had made the longest confirmed sniper kill in U.S. military history. The details were vague, redacted, almost mythic. 3,247 meters. His thumb hovered over the screen. It was impossible. Even the most seasoned sniper teams required multiple spotters, drones, and trajectory software to make shots over 2 kilometers. Reyes had done it solo, and the file confirmed it. A lone shot, precision so exact that no collateral damage occurred. Steele rubbed his jaw. She can't be real, he muttered to himself. But he had seen her hands on that rifle, had heard the faint echo of a bullet screaming across the desert and hitting its target. She was real, and she was dangerous. The next morning the base stirred like a hive, the hum of engines and shouted orders cutting through the cold, brittle air. Soldiers ran between supply tents and armored vehicles, their faces taut with fatigue and anticipation. Steele moved through the chaos, scanning the faces of his men, but his mind kept drifting back to Reyes. He needed to see her again. He needed to understand how someone so young, so quiet, could hold that level of precision, that level of control. He found her at the edge of the range again, crouched behind a sandbag, calibrating the Barrett with almost surgical focus. The rifle gleamed under the morning sun, a beast tamed by delicate, precise hands. "You're up early," Steele said, stepping closer. Reyes didn't flinch. She didn't look at him immediately. Instead, her eyes traced the horizon, noting every shift in shadow, every subtle hint of movement. "I like the mornings," she said finally. "Fewer distractions, better visibility." Steele's brow furrowed. There was more to her than skill. There was discipline bordering on obsession. And he knew from years of experience that obsession could be as dangerous as bullets. He crouched beside her, careful not to touch her or the rifle. "The shot yesterday," he said slowly. "I've seen long-range snipers before, but that was something else. How far did you estimate it?" She glanced at him briefly, then back at the sand and the distant mountains. 3,247 meters, she replied matter-of-factly. Steele's pulse quickened. That number wasn't just impressive, it was legendary. The theoretical maximum for a sniper with the Barrett under ideal conditions was about 2,800 meters. She had exceeded it, alone. No spotters, no guidance. "How is that even possible?" he asked, almost rhetorically. She shrugged lightly, her expression unreadable. "You factor in wind, humidity, elevation. You anticipate target movement. You visualize the path of the bullet in 3 dimensions before you even squeeze the trigger. And then, you do it." Steele was silent. He wanted to believe that such precision could exist, but logic screamed that she had either lucked into it or had training far beyond his understanding. Yet he had seen it. The evidence was undeniable. "Why keep it hidden?" he asked quietly. "Why not let the brass know what you're capable of?" Her eyes flickered for a brief moment, a shadow of something, regret, maybe, or pride, or pain. "Because some things are better left unspoken," she said. "Some kills don't need a record." The words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Steele had lost soldiers under his command, had watched missions fail, had carried the guilt of lives ending because of a single miscalculation. But Reyes, she carried something different. A burden so heavy it was invisible to everyone else, and yet she moved through it as if it were air, as if it had always been part of her. The radio crackled suddenly, breaking the moment. Steele's ears perked up, alert to every sound. The signal was faint, distorted by distance and interference. "Commander Steele," came the voice, tense but controlled. "Intel suggests movement near the northern ridge. Possible HVT sighted. Requesting confirmation." Steele's jaw tightened. He glanced at Reyes, who had already moved into position, setting up the Barrett with practiced efficiency. "Looks like we've got our target," he said. She didn't answer. She never did unless it served a purpose. She was already scanning, calculating distances, angles, and wind. Every breath, every movement measured, deliberate, controlled. Steele watched her work, heart pounding in tandem with the faint clicks of the rifle's mechanism. He realized that this mission had just changed. No longer was it about him, or the team, or even the target. It was about Reyes and what she could do alone, what she could do that no one else in the world could replicate. Time stretched. The sun climbed higher, but Reyes remained fixed, eyes through the scope, focus absolute. Steele could almost feel her mind tracing the path of the bullet, measuring millimeters in the heat, anticipating every micro-fluctuation in the air. He had never witnessed such a level of concentration, not even in the most disciplined SEALs under fire. Then, almost imperceptibly, she adjusted her scope and whispered, not into the radio, not to Steele, but to herself. Distance, 3,247 meters. Steele froze, the same number as yesterday. His pulse quickened. It wasn't just a record, it was a pattern. She had memorized, perfected, and mastered the impossible. For a long moment, they were silent. The world seemed to shrink to the space between her and the distant mountains. Steele felt a strange mix of fear, awe, and respect. He knew instinctively that she was more than a soldier. She was a force of nature, a weapon whose full potential he could barely comprehend. Then she loaded the rifle and fired a single round. The desert air seemed to hold its breath. Miles away, a small plume of dust erupted in the valley, a distant mark of precision that defied imagination. Steele blinked. He had seen the shot. He had seen the impact. And yet his mind struggled to accept it. How did you?" he started, but she cut him off with a slight shake of her head. "No one taught me," she said quietly. "I learned. Every shot, every mistake, every failure. You either adapt or you stop being effective." Steele's chest tightened. She had adapted and in doing so had created a legend of her own. But he also sensed the cost, the isolation, the burden of perfection, the quiet loneliness that came with being untouchable. "Lieutenant Reyes," he said finally, voice low, "if we survive this mission, I need to know who you really are, because what you're capable of, it changes everything." She glanced at him, expression unreadable, then returned her gaze to the distant mountains. "You'll see soon enough," she said. The sun rose higher, casting the desert in blinding light. Steele felt a chill despite the heat. For the first time in his career, he realized that this mission was no longer just a fight against enemies in the valley. It was a test of survival, skill, and the limits of human precision. And that test was centered on a woman who could bend the impossible into reality. The night sky was a velvet black, scattered with stars that barely pierced the desert's vast emptiness. Forward Operating Base Phoenix was quiet, almost eerily so, but inside the command tent, Commander Jason Steele's mind was anything but. The tablet in front of him glowed with encrypted intel, blinking with updates that seemed both mundane and catastrophic at the same time. Every notification brought more questions than answers, each one underscoring what he already suspected. Lieutenant Hannah Reyes was unlike anyone he had ever encountered. A secure transmission cut through the hum of electronics, the kind of message that made Steele's heart thud against his ribcage. He leaned closer, reading the details in disbelief. The file outlined a mission that had been off the books, classified to a degree that even Steele had never personally accessed. A sniper nest, strategically located over 3 kilometers from a high-value target, had been compromised, or rather, activated. The kill had already occurred, and the kill had been hers. Steele rubbed his eyes. The coordinates were precise. The report confirmed it. One lone sniper, armed with a Barrett .50 caliber rifle, had neutralized a target from 3,247 meters, further than he had ever seen confirmed in his career, and yet here it was in black and white. The enemy had no idea, the base had no knowledge, and the higher command hadn't been informed until now. He set the tablet down and exhaled slowly, trying to digest it. He had trained for moments like this, seen intelligence that had stunned other commanders. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for this. Steele had to see her. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The firing range was deserted under the moonlight. The barrels of rifles gleamed faintly under the dim lighting, but it wasn't the weapons that drew Steele's gaze. It was the solitary figure crouched near a sandbag, meticulously cleaning and reassembling her Barrett as though the rifle were an extension of her body rather than a tool. "You did it," Steele said, stepping closer. His voice held awe but was tinged with disbelief. "The HVT-3, 247 meters, alone, how?" Reyes didn't look up immediately. Her hands continued their work, tightening screws, aligning the barrel, her precision hypnotic. "Everything is a calculation," she said finally, voice calm, almost monotone. "Distance, wind, humidity, gravity, elevation, Coriolis effect. Every variable accounted for before the trigger is even touched. And then the shot is made." Steele's jaw tightened. He had seen advanced snipers work with teams, drones, spotters, every technological advantage imaginable. And yet here was Reyes, operating solo, rewriting the rules of physics with nothing but skill, instinct, and unwavering focus. "What about exposure?" Steele asked, his voice low. "One wrong move, one tiny mistake and—" She lifted her gaze to meet his, steel in her eyes. "I don't make mistakes." The words were soft, almost casual, yet carried the weight of certainty that froze Steele in place. There was no arrogance, no showmanship, only the stark reality of her skill. The transmission she received earlier that day had confirmed what Steele already feared. She was not only capable of hitting the impossible shot but doing so without support, without backup, and without leaving a trace. She was invisible, lethal, and precise beyond comprehension. Steele swallowed, his throat dry. "You did this without anyone knowing?" "Yes," she replied, setting the rifle down gently. Her movements were deliberate, but even in her stillness there was tension, the faint tremor of exhaustion hidden behind calm eyes. "Because if people knew what I could do, they would either fear me or use me recklessly." Steele felt a chill despite the desert heat. The burden of perfection she carried was unimaginable. Every mission she undertook, every shot she fired existed in isolation. There were no cheers, no medals, no recognition. Only the calculation, the silence, and the result. Lives ended. Battles won. And she alone bore the responsibility. He sat down beside her on the coarse sand, the cool night seeping through his uniform. "Who trains someone like you?" he asked quietly. "No ordinary sniper could pull this off." Reyes didn't answer immediately. She traced her finger along the edge of the rifle, almost as if drawing a path from the past to the present. "Some people are born with it, some learn, I did both, and some are pushed into it." Her words were vague, but Steele sensed layers beneath them, stories untold, moments of sacrifice and perhaps pain she couldn't share. The weight of her skill was not just physical or tactical. It was mental, emotional, and deeply personal. He had faced fear in war, but the burden she carried was something else entirely. The radio crackled again, pulling Steele from the introspection. Reports of insurgent movement near the northern ridge arrived with urgency. The HVT was mobile, moving with bodyguards and civilians nearby. Any miscalculation could mean collateral damage, innocent lives lost. Steele's team prepared for a coordinated strike, but Reyes simply nodded, as if already calculating the variables in her head. "I'll take the shot," she said calmly, "solo." Steele froze, every instinct screamed against it. He had trained for this, had led countless missions where teamwork was survival. Sending one sniper, no support, into a high-risk operation seemed reckless, but he had seen her work. He had seen her achieve what others deemed impossible. "Are you insane?" he asked, the tension in his voice barely contained. "Trust me," she said, her eyes meeting his. "If I don't, the opportunity is gone. If I do, it will be precise." Steele didn't like it. He never liked solo missions for anyone, even his most trusted operators. Yet, watching her, he felt a reluctant certainty. She wasn't just a sniper. She was a force that defied probability. Hours later, after carefully positioning herself on a ridge overlooking the HVT's convoy, Reyes lay in the sand, barely visible, her silhouette merging with the rocky terrain. Steele watched through binoculars, his chest tight, every nerve on edge. Her scope glinted faintly in the moonlight, but she remained unseen, almost ghost-like. He could feel the tension radiating off her even from miles away. Every muscle, every breath, every heartbeat synchronized with the rifle, the environment, the impossible shot. He had never witnessed focus like this, not in any SEAL, sniper, or marksman. She wasn't simply aiming, she was anticipating, calculating, becoming one with the physics of the world around her. Then, in a breath that seemed to stretch for eternity, she fired. The round cut through the night with a barely perceptible hiss, traveling over 3 kilometers across jagged terrain, dust clouds, and moonlit valleys. Steele's stomach twisted. He knew, instinctively, the calculations that had gone into that shot, the wind corrections, the arc, the timing. The shot had no margin for error. Miles away, the target fell, clean and precise. No civilians harmed, no trace of intervention, only the proof of the kill, a distant plume of dust marking an end that no one else could have achieved. Steele's heart raced. He exhaled slowly, unable to move. He had just witnessed history, and the history maker was lying prone in the desert, calm, collected, as if nothing had happened. When she returned to the base hours later, her face was streaked with dust, sweat, and fatigue, but her eyes were unchanged. They still held the calm, calculating intensity that had dominated every action she took. Steele approached her, unable to hide the mixture of awe and fear in his voice. "Lieutenant Reyes, that was impossible," he said quietly. "By every measure, it shouldn't have been possible, and yet you did it." She shrugged, almost casually, and wiped the sweat from her brow. "The impossible is just a target you haven't calculated yet." For Steele, those words were chilling, not because of the brilliance behind them, but because of the burden they implied. This woman had not only rewritten the limits of sniper warfare, she had done it silently, alone, and without recognition. He finally understood the truth he had been brushing against. Some soldiers don't just fight battles. They exist in a space where skill, discipline, and burden collide, creating a presence that shifts the very nature of conflict. Hannah Reyes was one such soldier. And he knew, deep in his bones, that watching her was not just observing a sniper. He was witnessing a force of nature, a quiet, unstoppable weapon whose impact would ripple far beyond the valleys of Afghanistan. The desert was restless that night. The wind whispered across jagged rocks and dunes, carrying the distant hum of engines, the faint echo of voices, and the constant hum of tension that clung to forward operating Base Phoenix like a second skin. Commander Jason Steele sat atop the sandbags, eyes narrowed against the cold wind, scanning the horizon for any hint of movement. The night mission briefing had been clear. Insurgent forces were regrouping near the northern ridge, moving under the cover of darkness. Any misstep could spell disaster. Hannah Reyes, as expected, had volunteered for reconnaissance. Solo, Steele had tried to object, his instincts screaming warnings he could not silence. He had faced danger countless times, had led teams through fire and ambush, and yet here was a soldier, a woman barely 24 years old, ready to step into the deadliest scenario with nothing but herself, a rifle, and her unmatched precision. "She's doing what?" Steele barked at the lieutenant in charge of field ops, voice low but sharp. "Alone. That ridge isn't cleared. There are multiple targets, civilians nearby. It's a death trap. The lieutenant hesitated. Sir, she insisted. She says she can handle it. Steele clenched his jaw, fingers tightening on the map. He knew what she could do. He had seen the 3,247-meter kill, but he also knew the risks. One bullet from a sniper could be calculated, precise, perfect, but one human was not infallible, not even her. Then we cover her, Steele said finally, grit lining his voice. We provide overwatch and support, but she doesn't move until I say so. Reyes, waiting at the edge of the base, already had her gear packed. The Barrett .50 cal rested beside her like an extension of her own body. She knelt for a moment, closing her eyes, her fingers brushing the rifle's grip with quiet reverence. The moonlight glinted off the polished metal of the barrel, illuminating a rifle that could kill beyond imagination. Steele approached her, voice tight but controlled. You understand the risk, Lieutenant. One wrong move in this mission, and your life is over. She looked up, eyes sharp, unyielding. I've calculated it, she said simply. I won't make a mistake. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that no calculation could account for every variable in war, every human error, every unforeseen circumstance. But he also knew that arguing was pointless. Her resolve was absolute. It had to be. Then move, he said finally, stepping back. Rays disappeared into the night, shadows swallowing her silhouette. Steele's men covered her exit, scanning the terrain with binoculars and night vision optics, but it was clear to Steele that she would not need help. Her calm focus and instinctive skill made her presence nearly ghost-like. Hours passed. Steele watched every monitor, every movement, every faint shimmer of light on the ridge. Then faint over the comms came her voice, a whisper. Movement detected. 5 targets, civilians 2 clicks east, adjusting position. Steele's pulse quickened. Her distance estimation, her calculation of collateral factors, every element came together flawlessly. She spoke with precision, brevity, but every word carried authority. Minutes later, a distant hum broke the silence. Insurgent vehicles moving through the canyon, unaware of the hunter lying unseen. Steele's eyes widened. She was alone, perched in the rocks, calculating shots over distances no human should be able to measure with such accuracy. Target 1, she whispered, aligning her scope. The faintest click. The bullet left the barrel, a tiny streak across the dark. Seconds later, confirmation. Target neutralized. Steele exhaled slowly, relief mixing with awe, but it was short-lived. Her voice crackled again. Target 2 approaching cover. Adjusting for wind gust, weight movement east. Gunfire erupted across the valley, insurgents discovering the ambush. Steele's heart raced. Her position could be compromised at any moment, yet she remained calm, calculating each next shot. Rays, get out of there, Steele shouted over the comms. I can't, she replied. Too close for extraction. Targets moving, civilians in proximity. One shot, then I move. Steele felt panic rise, an instinctive fear he hadn't experienced in years of combat. He watched her tiny figure maneuver across the rocks, rifle steady, eyes unwavering, fingers tracing the trigger. Each shot she fired was perfect, each calculation deadly. She moved like a phantom, her presence invisible, her aim flawless. The firefight intensified. Insurgents were now aware of the sniper, their movements frantic. Bullets ricocheted dangerously close, dust and rock exploding in showers of debris around her. Steele's stomach churned as he realized the sheer audacity of her mission. She was performing a ballet of war, each movement choreographed to perfection, yet every second could be her last. And then through the chaos, a voice from the radio. HVT moving east, armored vehicle, civilians in immediate proximity. Steele cursed under his breath. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. The target was moving into a zone where any miscalculation would have catastrophic consequences. He gritted his teeth, watching her through night vision optics. Rays adjusted her scope, taking into account the wind, the movement of the target, the angle, the distance. Her fingers hovered over the trigger as she whispered, almost to herself. Distance 1,820 meters, angle adjusted, trajectory calculated. The barrel flared and the bullet screamed across the desert night. Steele held his breath. Time seemed to slow. Miles away, the HVT's vehicle jerked violently. The target slumped. Precision. No collateral, perfect execution. Steele exhaled slowly, but his relief was tempered by the tension that remained. Reyes was still exposed, still a target, still alone. He watched as she recalibrated, tracking insurgents now aware of her position, firing round after round, each shot executed with surgical precision. The firefight reached its peak, bullets tearing through the rocks, vehicles overturned, chaos erupting in the valley below. Steele felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every man on the base depended on her success. Every civilian, every operative, every life in the canyon hung by the thin thread of her calculations. Then silence, a fleeting moment where the desert seemed to hold its breath. Steele scanned the ridge. Reyes had vanished from view, moving between cover, unseen, untouched. And then she reappeared, rifle slung, dust-covered but unharmed. She approached the extraction point, her movements deliberate, controlled, as if nothing had happened. Steele met her halfway, heart still racing, hands trembling slightly despite his training. "You did it," he said finally, voice hoarse. "All of it solo, against impossible odds." Reyes nodded, expression calm, almost detached. "It was calculated," she said simply. "All of it. No one else could have executed this." Steele realized then the truth he had been avoiding. She was not just a sniper. She was an anomaly, a force of nature, a soldier whose skill and focus defied the limits of human capability. And yet in her eyes he saw something else, a shadow of exhaustion, a flicker of burden that no one else could perceive. He had seen warriors before, men and women who carried the weight of war on their shoulders, but Reyes carried it differently. Alone, silent, deadly, perfect. Steele exhaled, finally allowing himself a moment of awe mixed with fear. "You're incredible," he said quietly, "but no one should carry this alone." She didn't answer immediately. She simply turned, scanning the ridge one last time, her gaze distant, as if the desert itself whispered secrets only she could understand. Then, without another word, she moved off into the shadows, leaving Steele to wonder at the woman who had just survived impossible odds and reshaped what he thought was humanly possible. The base was quiet now, but the echoes of the night's firefight still lingered in the air. Dust clung to uniforms, hair, and skin, and the faint metallic scent of spent shells hung in the wind. Commander Jason Steele sat alone in his command tent, staring at the map spread before him, but his mind wasn't on terrain, coordinates, or operational strategies. It was on her, the sniper, Lieutenant Hannah Reyes. He had watched her from the ridge, had seen her vanish into shadows and reappear unscathed, and yet he felt a tension gnawing at his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Reyes was more than skilled, she was beyond skilled. She was a calculation, a force, a ghost with the ability to kill with terrifying precision, and tonight she had proven it again. Steele had always prided himself on understanding his soldiers, reading their limits, knowing when to push and when to pull back. But Reyes, she was an enigma, and tonight he realized he needed answers. He found her at the edge of the base, kneeling beside her rifle, meticulously cleaning the barrel, even after everything she had endured. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat, but her posture remained perfect, almost ritualistic. Steele stepped closer, clearing his throat. "You've done this before," he said quietly, voice low, careful not to startle her. "Not just the kill, not just the recon. This level of precision, it's not natural. Who trained you?" Reyes didn't look up immediately. She ran a gloved finger along the rifle's scope, eyes scanning the horizon even though nothing moved. "No one," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but there was a faint edge of something unspoken. I learned myself. Every shot, every mistake, every failure, you either adapt or you stop being effective. Steele's chest tightened. He had trained men and women who had faced death countless times, yet there was something in her words that chilled him. She didn't just survive, she mastered. She existed in a zone beyond fear, beyond error, beyond human limitation. You carried that mission alone, Steele said, gesturing toward the ridge in the distance. Alone against multiple armed targets with civilians nearby. One wrong move, his voice trailed off. I didn't make a wrong move, she said softly. Her eyes, for the first time, betrayed a flicker of fatigue, a shadow beneath the calm. Every variable calculated, every angle anticipated, every shot precise. Steele studied her, noticing the subtle tremor in her fingers, the faint tightness in her jaw, the way her shoulders seemed heavier than the weight of her rifle. For all her composure, for all her skill, she carried a burden invisible to everyone else. A burden he suddenly understood was almost unbearable. Why? Steele asked, finally allowing the question to escape. Why do this alone? Why carry all of it on your own? Her gaze met his, and for the first time he saw more than the sniper. He saw the human beneath the weapon, a flicker of pain, of isolation, of something she could not, or would not, share. Because someone has to, she said quietly. If people knew, they'd fear me. They'd respect the kill, maybe, but not the method, not the responsibility. And responsibility, it's heavier than any medal, any commendation, any recognition. Steele's throat tightened. He had led teams into war, had watched men and women carry impossible burdens, but Ray's carried hers differently. Silent, invisible, deadly, alone, and somehow she had survived it all. Tell me about the shot, Steele said, leaning closer. The 3,247-meter kill, how did it happen? Step by step. Ray's exhaled slowly, a breath that carried the weight of nights spent alone, calculating trajectories, accounting for wind, gravity, and elevation. I tracked the target for 3 days, she began. Every movement, every pattern, every flaw in their security. I calculated the arc, the bullet drop, the wind gusts, the Coriolis effect. The shot was the result of every mistake I had ever made combined into one perfect calculation. Steele listened, spellbound. He had trained snipers, had led marksmen into combat, and yet the precision, patience, and mental endurance she described went far beyond what he thought possible. It was obsessive, almost inhuman. And the civilians, he asked, how did you account for them? They were in a zone I could control, she said. I timed the shot perfectly. The bullet would reach its target before anyone else could be affected. There was no margin for error. None. Steele felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just skill. It was moral discipline, self-restraint, and courage of the highest order. To kill with that precision, alone, without collateral damage, required more than training. It required something innate, something almost mythical. Rays, Steele began, unsure if words could carry the weight of his realization. You're more than a sniper. You're a weapon, but also a guardian. You're the one making decisions that would kill or save lives, and no one else even knows it. She shrugged lightly, almost dismissively, but her eyes betrayed the truth. That's the job, she said, and it's lonely. The higher the skill, the higher the responsibility. Most people don't see it. Most people can't handle it. Steele looked at her, feeling a mixture of awe, fear, and respect. He understood now why she operated alone. Not because she didn't trust others, but because no one else could carry the weight of her choices without faltering. No team, no commander, no support could match the precision of her mind and the burden she bore silently. He exhaled slowly, letting the realization sink in. You're a legend, he said quietly, but I also see the cost, and I don't want you to carry it alone forever. Rays looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time Steele felt a flicker of something personal. Maybe trust, maybe respect, maybe a silent acknowledgement that he had seen her, truly seen her, for the first time. You can't fix this, she said softly. It's not about help or team or recognition. It's about control. If I let someone else in, someone could make a mistake. Someone could fail, and I can't allow that, not ever. Steele nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position she had placed herself in. Then I'll do what I can, he said. I'll support from the shadows, cover you, ensure no one else interferes. But you have to let me know when the weight is too much. Her lips twitched faintly, almost a smile. We'll see, she said. And then she stood, dusting off her uniform, picking up her rifle, and returning it to its case with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object. Steele watched her move, a mixture of admiration and concern twisting in his chest. She had done the impossible, carried burdens he couldn't imagine, and yet she remained poised, controlled, and terrifyingly effective. She was a force of nature, a ghost in the desert, and he realized that every mission from here on would be shaped by her presence. And yet, beneath the skill, beneath the calm, beneath the precision, there was a human being, a soldier who had chosen solitude, who bore the weight of life and death alone, and whose secret kills had already altered the course of events in ways no one could measure. For Steele, the revelation was simple and terrifying. He was no longer just commanding men into battle. He was witnessing history in motion, and history was lying prone in the sand, waiting for the next impossible shot. The desert sun rose blood-red on the horizon, painting the sand and rocks in harsh, unforgiving light. Forward operating Base Phoenix buzzed with a quiet intensity, the calm before the storm. Commander Jason Steele walked briskly across the compound, scanning the ridge lines beyond the base. Every day in this unforgiving landscape reminded him of one unchangeable truth. Every second of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Hannah Reyes, already prepared and alone, was the focus of his attention. Her gear was assembled with exacting precision, the Barrett .50 caliber rifle resting beside her like an extension of her own body. Steele's heart tightened as he observed her. For the past missions, she had been untouchable, calculated, ghost-like, but today the stakes were higher, much higher. Intel reported that the insurgent leader, the high-value target she had already eliminated once before, was moving across a canyon with civilian contractors nearby. The situation was complex, a lethal puzzle of human lives, terrain, and time. One misstep, one miscalculation, and it wouldn't just be a mission failure. It would be a massacre. Steele approached her cautiously. Reyes, this is more than reconnaissance. This is high risk, civilians, moving target, multiple combatants. One mistake. He let the words hang in the heavy desert air. She didn't flinch, she didn't even look at him. I know the stakes, she said softly, almost like a mantra. I've calculated them. One shot, then reposition. The civilians are outside the line of fire. The HVT is alone for 2 minutes. It's enough. Steele's pulse quickened. He had watched her do the impossible before, seen her execute kills at distances no human could measure, and yet now he felt the gnawing tension of uncertainty. He had been trained to trust, to follow protocol, to command with authority, but Reyes operated beyond the realm of ordinary protocol. Are you insane? He said finally, his voice tight. I've watched you hit impossible shots before, but this is moving and there are innocents nearby. This is no training scenario. Her eyes flicked up, calm and unwavering. Insanity is doing what everyone else does and expecting different results. Calculated risk is different. I've done the calculations, Commander. You'll see. Steele exhaled sharply, feeling the impossible responsibility pressing down on him. He knew that trying to stop her was futile. All he could do was provide cover, observe, and pray that every variable she had calculated would hold true under the chaos of real combat. Hours later, she had positioned herself atop a rocky ridge overlooking the canyon. The terrain was jagged, unforgiving, filled with shadows and crevices perfect for concealment. Steele's team provided overwatch from a distance, but she was entirely on her own, unseen, undetectable. Her figure merged with the rocks, her rifle a gleaming extension of the earth itself. Steele's stomach twisted. He had led missions into hostile territory countless times, had faced ambushes, artillery, and deadly insurgents, but never had he felt such helpless tension. Reyes was executing the impossible, a lone operator against a moving target in a chaotic environment, and he could do nothing but watch. Through the night vision optics, Steele tracked the convoy of the insurgent leader. Civilians were scattered along the route, their movements slow and unpredictable. Every calculation she had made had to account for the unpredictable motions of human bodies, the subtle shifts in wind, the reflection of moonlight on metal surfaces. A fraction of a second too early, a millisecond too late, and the consequences would be catastrophic. A faint crackle came over the radio. Reyes's voice, calm and precise, whispered. Distance 1,820 meters. Angle adjusted. Wind 6.3 meters per second. Bullet drop calculated. Clear line of sight. One shot, then reposition. Steele's knuckles whitened on the binoculars. God help us, he muttered. Time stretched. The convoy approached the calculated kill zone. Civilians lingered just outside the impact radius, their lives unknowingly intertwined with the fate of the insurgent leader. Steele's heart pounded as he watched her steady the rifle, adjust her scope, and exhale slowly, her finger resting on the trigger with absolute precision. Then she fired. The shot echoed through the canyon like a whisper of death. Miles away, the insurgent leader's vehicle jerked violently and he slumped forward. Steele held his breath, scanning the civilians untouched. The shot was flawless, impeccable, deadly. But the moment of triumph was fleeting. Insurgents realized what had occurred and opened fire on the ridge. Bullets tore through the rocks around Reyes, kicking up dust and pebbles, dangerous shards of flying debris. Steele's stomach dropped. She was exposed. She had been in position for less than 5 minutes, and now the enemy was aware of her presence. Through the optics, Steele watched her move like a shadow, sliding between cover, adjusting her rifle, and calculating each step. Every muscle, every breath, every thought was synchronized with the rifle, the environment, the impossible shot she had just made. She was untouchable, yet vulnerable in the most visceral way imaginable. Reyes, Steele shouted into the radio. You need to reposition now. I know, she replied calmly, even as bullets whistled past her position. Covering my escape, targets immobilized, moving to next position. Steele felt his hands tremble. He had faced gunfire before, but never like this. She was moving under fire, calculating trajectories, predicting enemy positions, and maintaining precision that would intimidate even the most seasoned operators. And yet, she did it with the calm of someone who had been born to survive, born to calculate, born to kill without hesitation. Minutes passed like hours. The insurgents attempted to flank her, but every move they made was anticipated, every route covered. Reyes fired strategically, incapacitating threats without endangering civilians, moving methodically like a ghost conducting an orchestra of destruction. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached a new vantage point atop a smaller ridge. Dust-covered, fatigued, but unharmed, she checked her scope one last time and whispered into the radio. Mission complete, HVT neutralized, civilians safe, extraction in 2 minutes. Steele exhaled, relief mingling with awe. She had done the impossible again. She had neutralized a moving target in a dangerous environment, protected civilians, and survived against an alerted enemy, all alone. He stepped forward as she descended the ridge, finally able to approach her. Lieutenant Reyes, I don't know how you do it, he said, voice tight. No one could have executed this flawlessly. Not with moving targets, not with civilians in proximity, not under fire. And yet you did, alone. She shrugged lightly, almost nonchalant, but Steele noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the exhaustion hidden beneath her calm exterior. Calculation, she said simply. Experience, observation, an acceptance of responsibility. Steele shook his head slowly, realizing he could never fully grasp the depth of her skill, nor the weight of the choices she carried. He had watched warriors, trained operators, and elite soldiers, but Reyes was something different. A solitary force of nature, capable of bending physics, probability, and human perception to her will. And yet, beneath the skill, beneath the calm, beneath the deadly precision, there was humanity. A soldier who had chosen to bear her burden alone, whose silence masked the immense responsibility of every kill, every calculated trajectory, every life balanced on the edge of her rifle's barrel. For Steele, the revelation was sobering. He had witnessed the impossible, and yet he knew this was just the beginning. Every mission ahead would demand more, not just skill, but trust, coordination, and the delicate balance of letting one soldier operate at the limits of human possibility without breaking. As the extraction helicopter approached, kicking up sand and noise, Reyes slung her rifle across her back and began moving toward Steele. The desert seemed to exhale around them, the echoes of the night's firefight fading into silence. Steele watched her closely, a mixture of awe and apprehension twisting inside him. She had survived the impossible again. But for how long? How many missions could one person carry alone, silently, without faltering? He exhaled, knowing one thing for certain. From this moment forward, Hannah Reyes would define the limits of what a sniper could accomplish. And the battlefield, as he knew it, would never be the same. The desert twilight cast long shadows across the jagged canyon walls, painting the sand in shades of blood orange and charcoal. Forward operating Base Phoenix lay behind them, distant and silent, a haven only temporarily untouched by war. Commander Jason Steele crouched behind a boulder with the rest of the team, eyes scanning the horizon through night vision optics. Every movement in the valley below triggered his nerves. The insurgent convoy was advancing, heavily armed, and the civilians had been moved into the adjacent safe zone, thanks to careful coordination. But the real challenge, Hannah Reyes, was out there alone. Reyes had already been in position for hours. Her body pressed against the rock, her rifle extended, scope aligned with deadly precision. Steele could feel her presence even from a distance. The uncanny calm she radiated, the absolute focus, the discipline that made her almost untouchable. She wasn't just aiming at a target. She was calculating physics in real time, predicting trajectories and measuring probability in milliseconds. Target movement, came her voice over the secure channel, barely above a whisper. Convoy turning east. Distance, 3,245 meters. Wind 5.8 meters per second, slight gust from southwest. Angle adjusted. Civilian zone safe. Steele's jaw tightened. He had seen impossible shots before, but this was beyond any calculation he had witnessed. She was about to attempt her second 3,247-meter kill, in full combat conditions, against a moving target with no room for error. Reyes, Steele said, his voice tense, "This is insane. One shot, that's all you get. One miscalculation and—" "I know," she interrupted, her tone calm, almost detached. "I've calculated every variable, timed the shot with my heartbeat. Wait for the exact moment when velocity and wind align. Everything else is noise." Steele exhaled, heart pounding. He wanted to stop her. He wanted to call her back to the ridge, to pull her out, to protect her like any commander would. But deep down, he knew it was futile. She had done the impossible before, and she would do it again. He could only watch. The convoy edged closer, armored vehicles glinting faintly under the fading sunlight. Insurgents patrolled on foot, scanning the terrain for threats, completely unaware of the ghost lying in the rocks above. Steele's stomach twisted with anticipation. Every soldier in the team held their breath, knowing that the next few seconds could rewrite history or end it. "Wind fluctuation detected," Reyes whispered almost to herself. Her gloved fingers adjusted the scope minutely, accounting for the subtle shift. "Trajectory correction done. Distance unchanged. Heartbeat synchronized." Time slowed. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Steele's pulse raced in his ears, each beat echoing like a drum in the silent canyon. Every movement of the convoy, every shadow in the rocks, every gust of wind mattered. One misstep could obliterate everything. And then she fired. The round screamed across the desert, an almost imperceptible streak of light against the twilight sky. Steele watched through the scope, seeing the bullet travel farther than any human had ever imagined. The physics she had calculated, the milliseconds she had measured, the minute variables she had adjusted, all converged into one flawless execution. Miles away, the insurgent vehicle jolted violently. The HVT slumped forward motionless. The kill was perfect. No collateral damage. Civilians untouched. The impossible had been achieved again. Steele exhaled shakily, almost unable to comprehend it. He had witnessed history in real time, a sniper defying probability and rewriting the limits of human skill. But the moment of awe was fleeting. Insurgents immediately began returning fire, tracing the trajectory of the shot, desperate to find the source of the strike. "Move," Steele shouted into the radio. "Reposition, you've been compromised." Reyes didn't hesitate. She slid between rocks like a shadow, her rifle raised, eyes scanning for threats, movements fluid and precise. Bullets tore through the canyon walls around her, kicking up dust and shrapnel, but she was untouchable. Every step calculated, every angle predicted, every heartbeat synchronized with the mission. Steele's hands shook as he observed. He had trained elite soldiers, snipers who had executed impossible shots, and yet none had displayed this level of precision under pressure. She was beyond human, and yet beneath the calm exterior, he sensed the toll it took, the weight of responsibility, the focus required to perform flawlessly under life-and-death stakes. Minutes stretched into eternity. The insurgents tried to flank her, unaware of the perfect positioning of their hunter. Each move they made was anticipated. Each advance met with subtle, controlled suppression fire, strategically non-lethal to avoid civilian harm. Reyes moved as if the desert itself guided her, every motion a part of a calculated dance, a deadly ballet of survival and precision. Steele realized something profound. Reyes didn't just calculate the shot, she calculated everything. The environment, the enemy, the potential chaos, the civilians. She had become the center of a deadly equation, and everything else orbited her decisions. Finally, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, she reached a final vantage point, dust-covered, fatigued, but untouched. She slung the Barrett across her back and exhaled deeply, allowing herself a moment of humanity after the impossible execution. Steele moved toward her cautiously as if approaching a mythical creature. "You did it," he said quietly, voice strained with awe. "Again, the impossible twice, under pressure, against moving targets, civilians nearby, alone, I can't." Reyes cut him off with a faint smile. "You can't comprehend it," she said softly. "And you don't need to, that's not your job, you just need to know it works." Steele studied her, trying to reconcile the deadly perfection of her actions with the exhaustion and faint tremor in her hands. She was untouchable, yet human. She was a weapon, yet a soldier carrying an unbearable burden. He realized with a cold clarity that the mission would not have survived without her. And yet, every kill, every calculation, had cost her something invisible but immense. "You're a legend," he whispered. "But legends carry weight. You can't do this forever alone." For a moment her eyes softened, revealing the faint shadow of the human cost he had sensed all along. "Maybe not," she said quietly, "but until it's over, I have to." Steele nodded slowly, the desert wind stirring the dust at their feet. He knew this was the moment when history had been shaped by a single soldier, a human being with the ability to alter the outcome of conflict with unmatched precision. And he also knew that every mission from now on would be shadowed by the memory of her impossible shot, her calm under fire, her perfection under pressure. And yet, beneath all the awe, a question lingered. How long could one person carry such responsibility before the weight finally shattered them? The sun had finally set, leaving the desert bathed in deep indigo and the faint shimmer of stars overhead. Forward operating Base Phoenix was quiet, the chaos of the day replaced with an almost eerie calm. The night was a blanket that could not hide the exhaustion etched on every face of Steele's team, but none of it compared to the burden carried by one soldier, Hannah Reyes. Steele watched from the ridge as she returned from her final mission, her silhouette outlined against the desert moon. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle was slung across her back, dust-covered and glinting faintly. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, almost ritualistic. He could see the fatigue in the faint slump of her shoulders, the subtle tremor in her fingers, the way her eyes carried both focus and the residue of a day spent in impossible tension. He approached cautiously, uncertain how to address someone who had done what she had done. Words seemed insufficient. What did you say to a soldier who had neutralized targets at impossible distances, saved civilians, and carried a burden none of her superiors could ever fully understand? You did it, Steele said finally, voice low. Twice. Against moving targets, civilians nearby, alone. I've seen skilled operators before, but nothing like this. Nothing. Reyes gave a faint nod, not looking up, almost as if acknowledging the statement without needing praise. She lowered herself onto a boulder and began carefully cleaning her rifle. Her hands moved with precision, methodical, almost as if tending to the weapon could wash away the weight she carried. Steele stood beside her, silent for a long moment. "Do you ever break?" he asked quietly. "Not physically, mentally, emotionally. How do you carry all of this? All the calculations, the kills, the responsibility, alone?" She paused, letting the cloth linger against the metal of the barrel. Finally, her gaze lifted to meet his. Her eyes were calm, yet beneath that calm was a flicker of something raw, exhaustion, fear, doubt, maybe even loneliness. "You don't break," she said slowly. "You adapt, you calculate, you accept that every action has consequences and you live with them. That's all." Steele shook his head, struggling to reconcile the human with the myth. She was a weapon in every sense, but she was also a human carrying a weight that would crush anyone else. "And if you fail?" he asked. "If one shot goes wrong?" Her lips curved faintly, almost a ghost of a smile. "Then I fail once," she said softly, "but I learn, and I don't repeat the mistake. Failure is not an option, but it's not the end either. It's part of the calculation." Steele exhaled, feeling the tension in his body slowly unwind, but not completely. He had witnessed history in action. He had watched her perform feats that defied physics, probability, and expectation. He had seen the impossible executed flawlessly, and yet, as he stood beside her, he understood the cost. For every bullet fired, every target neutralized, every impossible shot executed, a part of her remained behind in the desert. The calculation, the burden, the solitude. The battlefield would remember her kills, her precision, her unparalleled skill. But no medal, no recognition, no commendation could honor the weight she carried silently, invisibly, alone. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the faint metallic scent of spent shells and dust. Steele looked at the rifle she had wielded with deadly perfection and realized it was more than a weapon. It was an extension of her will, her discipline, her focus. And yet it was also a reminder of the isolation, the solitude, and the human cost of wielding such power. "You know," he said quietly, almost to himself, "people will talk about this mission, about your shots, about the kill 3,247 meters. They'll call it impossible, legendary, heroic." Reyes looked at him calm, eyes reflecting the desert starlight. "They won't understand," she said softly. "They'll see the outcome, not the hours, not the calculations, not the moments of fear I had to suppress. They'll never see what it costs to carry this alone." Steele nodded slowly, understanding fully for the first time. She was more than a sniper. She was a guardian, a force of precision, a solitary human capable of reshaping outcomes that no one else could. And yet the cost of that perfection, the isolation, the relentless discipline, the unrelenting focus, was hers alone to bear. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't have to carry it alone forever," he said. "You have us, you have me. We can help shoulder some of it." Her gaze met his, unflinching, steady, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Some burdens are mine alone," she said, "and they must remain so. If anyone else carried them, the calculation changes, the precision fails, and people die." Steele understood then the truth he had been grappling with for weeks. She was untouchable not just because of her skill, but because of the discipline and isolation she imposed on herself. She had created a system in which only she could operate at this level of perfection, and any interference, even well-intentioned, would risk everything. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Outside the base, the desert night was vast, still and indifferent, stretching toward horizons unseen. It was the same desert where she had made impossible shots, neutralized threats, and carried a burden beyond comprehension. It was the desert where she had proven, again and again, that she could do what no one else could. Steele finally spoke, softer this time, almost a whisper. "You've changed everything we thought we knew about combat, about precision, about what a single person can do. The battlefield will never be the same because of you." Reyes tilted her head slightly, a flicker of emotion passing through her eyes. "I didn't do it for the battlefield," she said quietly. "I did it to survive, and to make sure others did too. That's the calculation that matters." Steele exhaled, realizing he could not argue with that. He had seen what she could do, and he knew that her brilliance was inseparable from her solitude. The impossible shot, the mission executed alone, the lives saved, all were the result of a mind operating at an intensity he could barely comprehend. And yet, despite the awe, despite the admiration, there remained a lingering question, a tension that would not fade. How long could one person carry the weight of the impossible before the silence, the solitude, and the burden finally fractured them? He turned to look at her one last time before night fully swallowed the desert. The ghost of a smile lingered on her face, almost imperceptible, as if acknowledging her own understanding of the cost and the responsibility she carried alone. Steele knew one thing with certainty. She was untouchable, unstoppable, and unforgettable. The legend of Hannah Reyes, the sniper who had achieved the impossible, who had killed at 3,247 meters, and who had carried the weight of life and death alone, would live on. And yet, in the quiet moments of night, when the desert held its breath and the wind whispered across the canyon, the question remained: how much longer could a single soldier bear such a burden before the weight of silence finally broke her? The desert waited, patient and indifferent, as Hannah Reyes walked toward the horizon, her rifle glinting in the moonlight, alone, but unbroken.